Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Rehan. I'm Chief Digital Officer at Karandaaz, and with me we have CEO of JazzCash, Atyab. It's been a few months that you have joined JazzCash, right? And before we start having this conversation, I would like to acknowledge Pakistan Fintech Network to really, help us put up together this talk. The agenda is to talk about EMI, but we'll dive into that. But before that, I think some catching up with you is also required. Yeah. So could you tell us about, what made you join JazzCash? You were in a very good company, MasterCard, looking at overall Pakistan, and there was a growth portfolio that you had. And jumping into fire and trying to rescue a few things, and the industry definitely has a lot of challenges. So, could you just talk about, what were your motivation to join JazzCash?
Sure.
And what are your plans?
Well, first of all, yes, MasterCard was a good company, but JazzCash truly is a great company. And that's one of the reasons that I decided to join, because what we are doing, it goes beyond just enabling people to move money from one place to another. What we're trying to do is build a fintech that the people of Pakistan deserve. And what do I mean by that? It's been 75 years, we're in Pakistan's 75-year anniversary this year, but we haven't really done anything to include people financially. And I don't mean opening a bank account, right? We have open bank accounts, but what is it that people do with that bank account that matters? Giving people the ability to borrow at will, to borrow for the right needs, giving people the ability to save and invest to protect their future. Those are things that fundamentally bank accounts need to do. And when I was having a conversation with Vion Group and with Vion Ventures about this role, there was a lot of alignment in what we wanted to achieve in Pakistan by capitalizing on what JazzCash has already built. As you know, we have the largest distribution network in the country. We are working with multiple players, helping them cash in, cash out, but also creating relevant use cases. That excited me. And now the next part of the journey, and hopefully, we are one of the ones to get a nod from the state bank to start evaluating building a digital bank.
Inshallah.
And if that happens, that would be the next step in JazzCash's journey, and that became truly exciting for me. It built on the 10 years of work that I had done in Pakistan. I moved to Pakistan in 2012 with a one-point agenda, and that was to include as many people in the financial fold as possible. You and I worked together at EasyPaisa and Tahir doing that. Then I spent a little bit of time at HPL, and then MasterCard, which was a great experience because it allowed me to learn from some of the best people in the business around the world. And now those learnings can be applied at JazzCash to help build JazzCash into a fintech that Pakistan can be proud of, into a fintech that solves problems for Pakistan, and really does put Pakistan on the map when it comes to inclusion and financial services.
No, thank you, and good luck with that. And I think if anybody can do it, that's you with the
Thank you.
Very strong credentials and experience, and an overview of working in different organizations as well. So before we sort of dive in more into JazzCash ambitions and plans, so let's just zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's look at last 10, 12 years, rather since inception of EasyPaisa, when the team in Tahir, came up with the idea, and Branches Bank was created, and Telenor came in as a partner. And now we are fast forward 12 years, 20, how many years? That was in 2009.
2009. So 2009.
Okay, so about 12, 13 years, that have passed. And there's a lot of achievements that the industry has done. But I think there are a lot of marks that, or spots that industry has also missed. So could you summarize what's your take on where the industry is? What are the opportunities that the industry could not really capitalize on? And then what are the current set of challenges that the players have? And also if you could talk about, in the last few years, State Bank has issued EMI licenses. There's a list of players who have gotten ahead and got that license. There are PSO, PSPs, now there's digital banking. So is I mean, what is really going to solve the problem of the common man? Having more players, giving more licenses. Is it really enabling the market? Or if it is not, what are the challenges on the supply side which are holding back, in your opinion?
Well, that's a lot of questions into one question, right? So I'll see if I can do justice to it. When I came to Pakistan 10 years ago, the industry was still very nascent. Easy Pesa was the only player in the market. We were at that time still trying to find our feet. And there were some great teams working both at Tamir Bank and at Telenor, trying to solve for one problem, and that was to get money from one end to another end in the shortest amount of time possible. That we have come a long way from there, right? So now we have multiple use cases. If you look at us and if you look at our competitors, I wouldn't say our competitors, but our collaborators in this war against cash, if you will. And in that, what we find is that we are now trying to bring in more relevance. We're trying to bring in use cases that would stick. We're trying to enable people to do more with their digital phone, with their cell phone, while at the same time trying to be embedded in their lives so that money is there when they need it. And that's a big sea change from where we were when Easy Pesa started. Because when we started out, तो उस ज़माने में a guy would go to a bus station, give a conductor some money, you're going to my village, give it to my wife, give it to my sister, brother, whatever. And now that's taken for granted. So there's a lot that needs to be said in what has been achieved in such a short period of time. While branchless banking was becoming successful in Pakistan, there were other parts of the world where similar initiatives were not so successful. For a very long time, you only had two centers of branchless banking excellence. You had Safaricom and M-Pesa in Africa, and you had the likes of JazzCash and others doing what they're doing in Pakistan. Now, building on top of that, you look at what has happened during COVID. It truly exacerbated the need to go digital. And we saw the biggest uptake was in bill payments. Bill payments was still a very big use case, but it wasn't truly digital. People would go to an agent and would pay a bill. Now people are doing it using their mobile apps or using SSD. So that I think is a key achievement in creating a culture where sending money virtually has become acceptable. Where we have sort of not done so well is to understand the needs of the people. We have, in very typical financial services fashion, we continue to build products as an industry, not one or two players, but as an industry, we continue to build products for whom we try to search for buyers. It has to be the other way around.
It's product first, huh?
It's got to be customer first, get as close to the customer as possible, understand what their needs are, and build products that actually make sense to them. And there was this movie when I was growing up, it was called Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. I say, let's figure out what we need to build by talking to people who we want to come first, right? And if we can figure that out, then adoption becomes easier. So the challenge still is that we sit in air-conditioned rooms and tall buildings, trying to build products for people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. My contention is that you cannot talk about inclusion and you cannot really feel the impact of inclusion till you've been excluded, right? So we have to walk in the shoes of the people who don't have access to financial services. We have to talk to them, we have to understand what their needs are and try to solve for those problems. Once we do that, we will overcome the challenges of that we currently face.
Yeah, so let me challenge you on that. While it's a very important way how you are sort of defining how to sort of go forward. Having said that, there are expectations to grow, there are expectations to be sustainable, and definitely there are challenges which we have seen in terms of pricing, et cetera, et cetera. So while I think everybody, including the policymaker and the investors, everybody should sort of come together in terms of creating enabling environment where what you are dreaming of to go and target the excluded segment and understand their needs. Do you think it's possible at right now? Do we need any other catalysts right now? Is there something more facilitation from the regulatory or the policy side? Sometimes we hear about counterintuitive initiative by, let's say, the tax authorities, while you want to, or somebody wants to go and hit a certain segment, and suddenly they're put with tax because you're moving money digitally, while in cash you can go ahead with bags full of cash and nobody's going to tax you, etc., etc. So if you could sort of talk about some of those enablers which you wish would actually be there, and can really accelerate catalyzation of this journey.
Yeah. So before I talk about the enablers, I think it's important to talk about the role the central bank has played so far. For their part, State Bank has led the charge when it comes to financial inclusion, when it comes to enablement of these services, where we have sort of, as an industry, let the State Bank down a little bit, is that we are not moving at the pace that they would like us to move at. Let's take RAST as an example. RAST and any kind of micropayment gateway would be a game changer for any economy. While we have adoption, and JazzCash leads the way there,
Thumbs up.
We recently crossed our 10 million mark, and we are now closer to the 12 million number out of the total 15 million that have been converted, 15 million or so that have been converted. Now is the time to build use cases, right? And I do not see a lot of proactivity there from the players. We here have a team that is looking at RAST and that is looking at the possibility of use cases that we can do on the P2P side, on the P2M side, and government payments as well. But we will see adoption once those use cases are there. So enabling those use cases would actually come from players like Bill and Melinda Gates and Karandaaz to fund innovative solutions that use the RAST rails, right? And that's where fintechs can play a role. Not every fintech has to do everything. They can pick and choose the use case that they want to build, and there is enough potential of scale in Pakistan that they could be that niche player for that particular use case. I know of a startup in Karachi that is already working on a P2M initiative. I cannot name them, but that P2M initiative is great. It enables nearly 50,000 merchants to start receiving payments using RAST, even before P2M has been opened up by the central bank. So that's the kind of proactivity that we need. When it comes to enablement, we also have to sort of, I'll talk about tax later, because tax is an issue for the privileged, right? They make money so they can give away some of it. It's also about awareness. So social engineering for us is a big problem as an industry. And I do not see any industry associations coming together and banding together to educate people about social engineering, about how they can be scammed. The sooner we nip this problem in the bud, the better it would be for the industry, because it would create credibility and trust. So it's not just the regulators that need to enable us, it's us as well, partners, each other. When we talk about fintechs, an apex player like JazzCash that is connected to merchants, that is connected to FIs, that is connected to the consumer, and that sort of sits at the heart of financial inclusion, should be the key go-to enabler for fintechs. And we should provide embedded financial services to fintechs to be able to provide their services to our 40 million subscribers and our 250,000 merchants and agents. So each of us have to play a part, and each of us have to sort of understand that we are not in this ecosystem, we are not creating a walled garden in the ecosystem for ourselves, we are doing it for the 220 million people of Pakistan. When it comes to the government, not measuring everyone with the same spoon would help. Take IBFT as an example, right? We created an IBFT regulation, which was largely made with banks in mind, and the limit was 25,000 rupees. Yeah. You and I may send people 25,000 rupees or receive 25,000 rupees, most people don't. Most people receive and send money in smaller chunks.
Yeah.
What the impact that it creates is it prevents fintechs from making money on these smaller accounts
Right.
to be sustainable. Right? A player like JazzCash, for a couple of years, if there's no IBFT fees, we have a big enough business. We have taken the hit, but in the interest of building this public utility, we sort of continue to keep going forward. A smaller fintech player who can't charge a service fee on an IBFT because it's not above a certain threshold, sustainability becomes a challenge. So my request to the regulators would be to start to look at IBFT and other regulation in terms of the business impact it would have on the smaller players, on fintechs, on players like us, even on banks as well. The other big area where I think we need to sort of enable, and this has happened in Ghana and Tanzania and some other parts of the world, is where it has been recognized that creating an agent network is actually a public utility, right? Much like electricity and gas and whatnot.
And Rust.
And Rust.
Yeah.
So
Public utility.
by creating that public utility, you're funneling in cash to digital for the entire industry, right? For all, I suffer from this because of all the money that comes in, 60% of it is IBFT almost immediately. And I'd like to see it go through Rast.IBFT eventually. So being able to then charge cash in commissions, either straight to the customer because it's convenience, helping them digitize cash, or charging the banks that are actually benefiting from that cash in, are some of the things that we should need to evaluate as an industry, where we're not necessarily putting the burden on the beneficiary of the person receiving the money, but the ancillary beneficiary that's making float from it, i.e. an FI or a bank, right? And those are just some of the things where we need to sort of start to have a conversation and maybe get to a point of conclusion in the due course.
So, if you just put on top, the EMI layer, and, there are about, I don't know, 9 or 10, 11 who have applied.
Ever-growing list.
11 who have applied, 4 or 5 who have gone live, and they definitely, each one of them have a use case, on their own. So the two questions that I have. So how do you see these cousins of branchless bank? What is the future? Do you think that they will remain use case specific? Because at least the 4 that have gone live all have an ambition to have an e-money wallet for the consumers, which basically gives them a kind of shows that their intention is to be, if not to compete head on with JazzCash, but at least to play a bigger, larger sort of game. We do know that some like Finja, etc., are using this to really provide a wallet to their, let's say, lending sort of use case, etc. But for NeaPay and for some of the other players which are coming in and targeting consumer, so what is your assessment, as now the CEO of a major branchless banking player? How do you see EMIs? Where do you think they fit into the sort of overall scheme of things? What role will they play? And then, you talked about agents being a public good, because they also need to cash in eventually. Some of them may have some of the payment flows which are already banked, but most of the economy is still in cash, so they're going to face that problem. So do you think they're going to go ahead and develop their own cash-in points? Should they leverage on the cash-in points and the agent network that JazzCash and EasyPaisa has? And what will it do with the dynamics, etc., etc.? Views on that.
Sure. Look, I think it's a great addition to the fintech and financial services landscape that we have multiple players that people can use to transfer money digitally, right? By virtue of my previous role, I was intimately involved with some of the EMIs, and I think some of the business models are great. Most of them are still trying to figure out a business model, but some some are starting to crack the code, and at least my social media feed is filled with positive praises and compliments for some of these players. So they're doing something right, right? I see them as partners. I don't see them as competitors.
Okay.
I see them as enablers of the digital economy. When it comes to a player like JazzCash, I feel that we have spent a lot of time and effort in building a distribution network. I will not go into the exact amounts of how much money has been spent by both the large players in building this agent network, but it's significant. So I do not, if I was an EMI operator, I would not build my own distribution. I would strike a deal with those entities that have access to the agents and work with them. Now, one of the EMIs is uniquely placed because the group that they're a part of owns an FMCG distributorship, right? But most of them don't have that access, and this is what we are evaluating these days. We want to get to a point where we have not just 250,000 cash-in points, we have 3 times that in the market. And have a distribution network that the entire industry could leverage, including EMIs. That's what my suggestion to EMIs would be, to strike a deal with someone who owns that space right now. It could be a player like us, or it could be the MNPs and IBLs of the world, who coincidentally are our partners as well in this journey. So that cash-in problem sort of is solved for. They just need to figure out whether that makes sense for them or not. When it comes to making money, it comes back to use cases. Right now, the use case is not defined specifically for the different EMIs. I see a lot of consumer players. I do not see as many SME players. I do not see as many MSME players. I do not see a freelance play specifically. Abhi we are relying on Payoneers of the world and constantly saying, yaar, PayPal kyun nahi aa jata? Whereas with the kind of rails that we have available to us, we can actually create, say, Rast into a remittance hub, and then everybody that connects to it can benefit from that. I also see EMIs not really making any money in the short term.
Okay.
Not unless they build use cases for which they can charge subscription fees, or use cases for which they can pass on some of the pain to the customer, which I don't think is the right time for them to do. When they start to partner with entities whose book they can leverage to lend, maybe there's an opportunity there. My experience has been that making money on float would be very difficult for these fintechs, because money will not stay. It will come in, people will transact, and whatever money is left, they'll probably transfer it out to a name that they have slightly more trust in, perhaps a bank. And that trust would need to be built for them to be cash in on that float income at some point in time. There'll be some minor float income that they'll get, but not a lot can be relied on. Once they pivot to building business accounts and servicing small businesses, then the ability to have longer term relationships, sustainable relationships would perhaps be achieved. But lending services is where they would make money, not in payments. The payments, the revenue from payments is eventually going to go away anyway.
And you think that consumer play is not going to get them anywhere?
It's
because there's a lot of cash that you have to burn
Yeah.
to keep the consumers engaged, to keep them afloat, to make any money out of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Just the consumer play won't. The consumer play would have to be a gateway into building other plays, especially in the non-digitized space, which is MSME. And SME is $100 billion of throughput opportunity.
So what branchless banks did to the banks, do you fear that EMIs is going to do to branchless banks? Are they going to eat away into some lunch? Because you see, creating new markets, creating new categories, while this is where they should focus, but we have a very small segment of the society, because of whatever reasons, which basically right now are using banks or any kind of formal financial ecosystem. So one short-term approach is to target, let's say, your subscriber base or your target base, because you also have from JazzCash, a focus on an eye on merchants and MSMEs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So do you see that? Do you think they think, look at you as a collaborative player, or it's just one-way feeling that you have about them?
Well, I don't know, because those conversations haven't started yet. Where these conversations have happened, there is potential to collaborate. I'd like to sort of start to get these conversations going, because at some point in time, we will move to open banking, right? And that's where true collaboration would begin, when there is exchange of data, when there is their ability to build services that we could leverage, they could leverage our services. That's where true collaboration would begin. Right now, if we sort of go into a collaboration space, it would be one-on-one. We would not be able to quickly open it up because it's a gray area right now. There's no regulation around it. I do not see them as a competitor, as I said. To take your lunch analogy, there's a smorgasbord of $230 billion opportunity out there, right?
There is, yeah.
So there's no point to go red ocean on this. We should have a very focused strategy on how to increase the base. So if you're issuing cards, don't issue cards to people who have a social media presence. Issue cards to people who actually would benefit from having a non-cash instrument in their pocket. If you're building a business, don't focus on the group companies that you're a part of. Go beyond. Work with everyone. And that's where I feel that change is going to come. That pivot needs to come, where a lot of these initial plays that are happening is to get the name out. But when it comes to true collaboration, you have to figure out how to get the cash in. That's a very important aspect. Everybody holds cash. Very few people keep it in their bank accounts, and when they keep it in their bank accounts, they're not the ones who you're targeting with the wallet, right? Unless you're offering significant discounts on your cards, like the largest bank in the country or other big players who have a big issuance play, you will not see a lot of transactions on those cards. So I think EMIs, there's a possibility that there would be some skimming of accounts from branches.
Sure.
I expect EMIs, and I request them to go out and look for the blue ocean. Build this market. There are 130 million adults in the country, 70 million new adults who will enter the workforce over the next 10 years. So this 200 million opportunity needs to be capitalized. Don't go after the 20 million who already have a card in their pocket.
No, that's true. I hope somebody takes notes of that. So you mentioned open banking, and it seems you're quite excited about that opportunity. So let's talk about that for a bit. What are some of the possibilities? So is it another sort of a sexy thing that we will have in the market, and technologists will have a go at it because we need to improve our technology platforms to make it happen, and there'll be some regulations. Will it really open up the market? Are we in Pakistan, from a cultural point of view, as a society? There are a lot of apprehensions that consumers have. Even right now, when we look at some of the demand side surveys, lack of trust. Usually, if it's not the top, one of the issues that customers say that I don't trust my sort of service provider when it comes to finance. I don't know what their pricing is. I don't know what are they charging. I can't understand. It's just because I need to. So hence so they don't. A lot of customers do not love the banks.
Yeah.
So from that aspect, if we bring in an open banking framework, where customers still need to mature as well of what is their responsibility in terms of giving somebody an authority to use their data, what does that mean, et cetera, and there could be a lot of skimming, frauds which could also emanate from that. And similarly, large institutions like yourself, you have a lot of data. Why would you like to share with others and have them sort of use it? So do you think when is the right time? And then there are, of course, different models. So a regulator could enforce it, or the industry could come together. Where do you think are we gonna see any development on this?
So the industry has tried, right? There are direct transfer APIs that are already available. I think one of the PSO PSPs has gone out and aggregated these APIs from various banks, and they're offering it as a payment method. So it's not like it's not happening. It is happening. At HBL, we did our first instance of Open API back in 2017. The regulation would only ensure that the data is not, it's not abused, right? That comes with a lot of awareness that we need to create with the customer, that they're the owner of the data, it's their data to share, not the institution's data to share, and that kind of awareness would take a while to create. It's inevitable that we go to a space where we are not just sharing data, but also sharing services, right? I could create a product or a service that I could white label and offer to my fintech partners and banking partners to offer to their customers. What fintechs can help us do, the industry do, is actually solve for new problems and new markets with new solutions. And to be able to get those solutions to the old babas at the banks, there has to be a rail. Right? And that rail comes from creating this handshake through an API or through data exchange. That's where there's a lot of possibility. That's where the innovation came from. If you look at Europe, Europe leads the space in open banking, and a lot of innovation from entities like Fedor came because there was an opportunity to share those services and share that data with other players. While at the same time, GDPR ensured that the custodians of data did not abuse it. Those are the kind of things we would probably have to do here as well, more so because our population is vulnerable, right? And they need to be educated, they need to be made aware of their rights. But open banking and open finance is the way to go. If my dream is to be an embedded fintech in every service provider's app, I cannot do that if there isn't an open banking space. And that goes for all the EMIs, that goes for all the fintechs. And that's why we need to start to evaluate this. My understanding is, the brief conversation that I had with the central bank in my previous role, it is on their radar, they are evaluating it. And as I said, we have a very progressive regulator, but we have a progressive regulator who's also very consumer conscious. So they will make sure that when the regulation comes out, it protects the rights of the customers before anything else.
So there's also this view that it's not only between the banks to sort of decide on protocols or central banks. So there's some stakeholders outside the banking infrastructure and ecosystem. So NADRA, telcos, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think about those? Are they essential components to start this? Or these could be stakeholders which could join later on? Because when you look at information that NADRA has on a consumer, right now, it's used for verification and stuff like that, but it's not really used to create hardcore analytics. It's basically information that the banks have. They basically try to make sense out of it, and so there's no cross-pollination. When I'm talking about open data, I think that's maybe a multi-year sort of dream to achieve. But because we have NADRA and we have telcos, and you sit very close to another telco, and I'm sure there's some synergies which are already there. So you think they are early stakeholders of this, or they should be part of a later engagement?
Oh, absolutely. They should. look, conversations are only effective when we have everyone's view and there's consensus around the way forward, right? That's why associations and networks are important because they bring everyone to the table, right? And then present a unified view to the regulators and other stakeholders who are not on the table at the time the conversation occurred. So having telcos on the table, having even the telco regulator on the table is important because they have a view on how data should be shared. NADRA is a very key player, and NADRA also has stakeholders which are, NADRA is a national security asset, so we have to take into account national security as well. But it's not an all or nothing game, right? There are some elements of data that we share with each other. My CNIC is probably known to more people than I'd care for, right? Or for that matter, my height and my age or whatever, those are all data points that are out there. While if I go to NADRA and ask for those details, I would run into a lot of, I don't want to use the word that's in my mind, so I'll say I run into a lot of lack of facilitation. And so we have to sort of figure out what data is shareable anyway, right? And rather than getting a fintech to go and scour the web for this data, make a central repository where we can share this data without a lot of hindrance. The data that is not shareable, that's where the tough conversations happen. But baat to shuru kare na, kahin se to shuru kare.
There has to be. And some countries, it's basically done reciprocally between some players, and they created a model, and I know HBL sort of tried doing that, but it has not reached any scale where it could become either an example. So I think it's individual leaders having this wish, and I think having an enabling regulation will definitely sort of help. And RAS also moving towards the merchant use case, where there could be opportunities of having a third party acquire merchants, not just the banks and the fintechs, and how they will plug in with RAS, etc., creates a lot more sort of opportunities as well. So, let's talk about future now. So we're talking about challenges and EMIs and what's happening, and with JazzCash as well. So 10 years from now, hopefully you'll be around in JazzCash. So what will it look like? What do you want to morph this organization into? What would JazzCash sort of look like? And let's say 5 years. 10 years seems too sort of long.
Yeah, 5 years.
Yeah.
Let's say 4.5.
Okay.
That's my retirement date in my head.
Okay.
Look, for me, if we are able to create a digital financial service, a fintech that is relevant, contextual, and embedded in people's lives, trying to help them solve everyday problems, I would have done my job.
Okay.
And that means getting to know my customer better. Being there when they need me the most. And when I say me, it's JazzCash. I'm nobody, right? It's about understanding that a person who walks into a hospital with their 4-year-old daughter for an emergency operation shouldn't have to wait 6 weeks for an approval for a loan. It's about understanding that a person who needs to buy inputs for their crops doesn't have to be abused by the aarti, right? It's about making sure that when we talk about financial inclusion, it's not just about yaar account khol lo, itne account khulwa lo. It's actually about giving them opportunities to be food secure, to be energy secure, to be job secure, to be health secure, and to be energy secure. So we are not really in the business of financial services. We are actually in the business of enabling lives. And with that purpose, we start to build fintechs and organizations that want to solve particular problems. I think in 5 years, if we have 5 institutions like that truly understand the customer, the industry would have taken a long stride forward.
No, that's great vision. But let me put you on hot seat.
Sure.
So, what steps have you taken to embark on this journey, to change the mindset of the organization? Given my own sort of background, of such institutions, so there is a number that's hanging around on the head that you have to meet quarter on quarter. These things. So, are you doing something? Have you initiated any projects? Because you're talking about customer first, you're talking about experience first to really understand. So are there any changes that have been initiated yet?
Yeah.
If they're not secret.
Look, no secrets, right? Open book. And I can tell you, so there's some initiatives that we have started, and some we have learned from our telco partner.
Right.
A lot of great things were being done at Jazz, and we sort of looked at it and we say, how can we adopt this to financial services? Just before I came on board, JazzCash brought on a chief of customer experience.
Okay.
And now the chief customer experience team is laying out a framework where our product managers, where our sales teams, where people on the tech side are not 4 or 5 steps removed from the customer.
Okay.
Right? When I came to Pakistan 10 years ago, and the person I was working with, he told me, hey, 3 months, I don't want to see you in the office. Go and understand who my customer is. And you and I have both worked with him. So look, for me, the product team who sits in this building should be spending at least 40% of their time understanding customers before they're building a product. Once they've built a product, they need to have a constant feedback loop. So our customer experience team is going to focus on that. We have contact center issues, there's no denying that. We are solving for those contact center issues. If we want to become a fintech, it can't just be the phone, right? We have to be an omni-channel engagement player. We are engaged on social media, we are engaged on SMS, we are engaged in live chat, we have chatbots deployed, and we are understanding the customer with every interaction. So that's step number 1, and the person that we have leading this initiative is brilliant. He has been an entrepreneur himself. He has telco experience, he has financial services experience. One of the smartest people I've come across. So he's the right person for the job. And now with him also looking after product in the interim, there's one less hoop that needs to be jumped through, right? So that's initiative 1. Initiative 2 that we are all now working on is we're going through a culture change exercise. We are trying to move towards a more fluid structure, where people who feel are problem solvers should jump in and solve problems where it's necessary. So moving away from the typical Pakistani hierarchical structure to actually a more fluid startup-like situation. We have some brilliant young people here, from NUST and LUMS and some international universities and IBAs and whatnot, and they're just filled. All they need is a sense of purpose and direction. And that's what we're working on together. The culture exercise has started, and it's not just limited to JazzCash. It will include our sister organization, which is Mobile Link Microfinance Bank. It will include elements of Jazz that are direct contributors to our work, and they will all be stakeholders in our culture. While at the same time, we have a very focused strategy as well that we are now implementing. Which was put together just before I joined. It's a solid strategy, and it helps us go from being what we were to what we want to be in a very comprehensive way. So we have squads already put together who are working on elements of that strategy, and we will be taking that forward. For the rest of the year, the focus is on bringing in app stability so that our customers don't feel the pain as much as they do now, is to bring in the tech stability, is to bring in the right use cases, and then focus on building and growing and sustainably scaling up.
Okay, that's great, and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
So I have 2 more questions.
Sure.
One is about the government.
Yeah.
And countries like Pakistan, where government, be that sort of social transfers, like BISP or tax collection, etc., etc. So we have seen examples of, for example, in India, so direct cash subsidy has been a driver to attract people or to force masses to converge to a banking sector.
Yeah.
And in Pakistan, we have some examples of where it has been tested, previously, but not to the extent that it becomes a force. Because when we talk about the real, marginalized segments, and if you think about women, specifically, the segments that these social stipend programs target, they land into the heart of those, where no bank would go on its own because it's just not profitable. And zooming out, also about the collection of taxes and stuff like that. So any sort of expectation that you have or wish you have from the government, that what is it that they need to do? While I think on a project-to-project basis, RFP to RFP basis, I think financial institutions do sort of interact and participate, but on that as well, they fight on price, and and the larger, bigger players definitely have an edge on that. So, is there anything that you think needs to be done on the government side? And there are definitely models out there which could then facilitate, enabling or connecting them to be part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
While economic opportunities for people may be created, we are going through a high inflation, which means lesser jobs and stuff like that, and inshallah we will come out of it. But government is a key stakeholder, and government sending money to people or to their vendors, etc., etc. So you think there could be a program based on that, and what do you think should be focused there?
So I'm no government expert, right? I leave it to a wonderful team that we have that operates in the government space. But I'll share with you what I learned at MasterCard. And MasterCard works extensively with governments. In fact, they feel that this is a strategic imperative to work with governments. There are significant flows that governments can digitize, through the Smart Cities Initiative or through toll and transit, tax collection, challan collection. Even today, challan collection is a big use case, especially in Islamabad. We work very closely with the Islamabad Traffic Police, and
I paid my challan through JazzCash.
And so that's just an example of what can be done nationally, right? And we have a very interesting structure. We have federal government, and then we have provincial governments, and I know that each of the provincial governments has some form of a digitization agenda. Now, in that digitization agenda, there are a lot of disparate initiatives that are taking place. So my request to the governments would be to start to bring a holistic view to what digitization of financial services and digitization of cash looks like. It should not be multiple ministries trying to work on the same initiatives. Come together, put together cross-functional teams, be more agile, right? If we are going on an agile journey as fintechs and tech players, the government should also maybe embark on a journey to see how they can bring efficiencies in the digitization effort. Utility stores is an example. You could use utility stores and provide a food subsidy through the BIS program or the SAS program, and that food subsidy could be digitized. A person never has to see cash. They can get the disbursement on an instrument or in their wallet, and they can go to the utility store and get food against points. And they would get the benefit of subsidized food. The government would not have to deal with multiple amounts of cash or large amounts of cash, and you would be able to create positive behavior in the meantime, because they would now be using a wallet or a card for a real use case, right? So holistic thinking and combining of efforts is going to that's what will make it happen, and we'll be there to support them along the way. That's what fintechs do, right? We solve problems, but we can only do them on a small scale. When the government comes in, they have a large scale agenda. So we can pick up problems, smaller problems, and collectively help them solve larger problems. That's part of their mandate.
So having worked with some trying to solve some of these problems with the government, I think one of the challenges that they sort of have is arriving at the right price. And they feel that the financial institutions want to skim. And hence, they have a mindset of having a predatory pricing regime. And that's why always it goes through an RFP, because then everybody feels secure that the price that has been discovered is through an open competition, etc. But having said that, it also sometimes leaves very less margin for smaller players who may be able to give better service in a specific geography or an area to compete with that kind of a national sort of RFP. So the question is, do you think the industry that you're part of can converge to some kind of, I wouldn't say price, but the fact that there are some use cases out there. So for example, in utility bill payment, I was asking my team the other day, so how did the industry arrive at, is it 8 rupees? Yeah, so who said 8 rupees? How did they actually agree, and why is it being not challenged that, it is predatory or not? And I think it seems a fair distribution as well among players. Yeah. And I know there was a difference of opinion internally. I think some of these use cases in the government side require leadership from the industry as well to come up with a fair price, which will not be predatory.
Agreed.
Which will be something that the government can also, absorb based on the use case that they want to sort of energize, and the value chain also makes reasonable returns. Do you think that kind of approach can be taken? Because this is one of the challenges.
Sure. If something as regulated as power and electricity, if you can push up the price per unit, right? Providing a facility to digitize and reconcile collection of that utility should not be dealt with on the same price that was agreed upon a few years ago, maybe almost a decade, maybe over a decade ago. So if the powerhouses are making money, share the burden a little bit, right? But I agree with you. It's not just utilities, right? It's a lot of other things, especially when it comes to G2P payments. Yeah. There is regulated prices there. I wouldn't call it predatory. I would call it regulated pricing there as well. I would suggest that the industry should agree to do these things, government initiatives, at cost. Because these are strategic growth initiatives, they would drive good behavior, right? If you do it at cost and not at a loss, you're still growing, right? Nothing, you're not gaining anything, but you're growing. Where we could potentially make money is when we start to build use cases that are relevant on top of that good behavior. Right? We can't just stop at utility bill and say, oh, just because I'm getting some amount from the government, I'll make a utility bill use case. But I could make use cases where I could make more money using the same customer base. So we have to be a little free market a little bit of free market thinkers as well. So I would not put the entire onus of the government. I would say, yes, the government has a part to play. Yeah. Try to do things at cost for the fintechs, and let's see where it goes.
Oh, great point. So last but very important question. So just like any other sort of development, especially which is tech-led, so there are segments which will become more and more sort of marginalized.
Yeah.
And when we look at survey after survey, there's this latest Fintechs survey done by World Bank, which has recently come out. So women are left behind in that development, and I think the exclusion is increasing. While we can talk about social norms and cultural norms, etc., but there's a lot of things that service providers can also do. So other than Kashf, who is a dedicated institution for financial services for women, there are windows that each bank or financial institution has, but we have not seen a real game changer. and 50% of our population is women. So if we have any sort of want to have a realistic go at knocking down or increasing the financial inclusion, they have to be inclusive. And there are multiple challenges. And I think with each technological advancement, just like internet also, while it's a great equalizer, it is an inequalizer as well, because it creates a barrier for people who do not have access to internet.
Yeah.
So from that aspect, are there any specific programs that JazzCash has and ideas that you're working on, which it will, at least in your customer base, and if you have that number, that what is the split of women customers in your subscriber base, and what are you doing to increase that?
Yeah. So I don't have the specific numbers, but I can tell you that we are behind. We are behind because we are not at 50%, right? And that's the goal. We want to get there so that 50% of our customer base are women. That's what we want to work towards. We will get there, but we need to accelerate that progress. When it comes to Millnet program, and I made this point in my leadership team the other day, that we cannot sit in a room and try to make decisions about inclusion when we don't have women on the table. So my personal challenge is to have women leaders in the boardroom and women leaders in my leadership team who can represent 50% of the population, right? How do I know, how can I presume what hardships women go through? But I'm a privileged South Asian man who's lived a life of comfort and luxury for most of his life. How do I presume what a woman who wakes up at 4 in the morning in a village somewhere, what does she go through because she doesn't have access to financial services? That is why it's important for us to be out there, listening to people, understanding what their needs are. Right? And the needs are not just कि यार मेरे पास पैसे नहीं हैं. The needs are कि मेरे पास मुझे अपनी हेल्थ की सिचुएशन नहीं पता, मुझे ये नहीं पता कि मैं अपने बच्चों को एजुकेट कैसे करूं, मैं खुद एजुकेट कैसे हूं. We have to understand those needs and build financial services around those needs. That is how you achieve inclusion. And my challenge is to have at least 50% of my leadership team within the next 2 years be represented by the smart agenda.
So in your sort of international experience, are there any sort of example of financial institutions or fintechs who have really cracked the code when it comes to providing financial services or including women into the financial fold?
Well, Grameen for one, right? That's the example that comes to mind. Kashyap has done a great job. And it's not just financial inclusion, right? So, people like Circle and Sadaf, who are working on She Loves Tech and Tech Karo, are enabling women with digital skills. And those digital skills would enable them to earn wages that can help them not only sustain their lives, but also thrive in a digital economy. So there are a lot of players in Pakistan, there are a lot of disparate efforts. Perhaps JazzCash is a platform where we can bring these efforts together and try to solve this exclusion problem altogether. When I say exclusion, it's not just financial inclusion, it's all forms of exclusion. Right?
And I think JazzCash coupled with Jazz, because Jazz provides the basic real infrastructure in terms of connectivity. There should be.
So I can tell you, this is top of the agenda for Jazz. I happen to sit on Amir's leadership team, and this is top of the agenda as well. We need to be the most inclusive organization out there to make sure that it's not just women, but also transgenders, people who are marginalized. We are serving them just as well, if not more, as we are to the mainstream.
So, finally, looking at the Porter's model of analyzing the industry, the five forces.
That takes me back like 2 decades, right?
So you think the rivalry is going to increase, is going to intensify in the next 5 years with digital banking licenses, players coming on board as well? What's going to happen?
Yeah, the rivalry will increase if we go the same route as banks and go after the same customers. It's a big world out there. 220 million people in this country, 130 million adults, same stats I gave you before. most of the people are underserved. The rivalry is in our heads. It's not out there. It's not a saturated market. And for us to find what that blue ocean is and swim to that blue ocean, that is what would differentiate a fintech that sustains itself and scales in respect to Pakistan's population and size, versus fintechs that will sort of eat each other alive. And we saw this a couple of years back as well, right? When a few fintechs were starting out and they were already at each other's throats before even starting their business.
Yeah, I deliberately avoided asking questions. So, Atyab, it's been a pleasure catching up with you and having a chat with you in this new role, and great objectives that you have set for yourself and JazzCash. And I wish you all the best. And we need more leaders like yourself who have a vision of more than just hitting the numbers, also to develop the sort of the use cases which actually impact lives. I think that's very important. Yeah. If more and more leaders have that viewpoint and they focus on the segments which are not sort of included, I think we definitely can really hit the mark.
Thank you for saying that. I would just say that I'm only as effective as my team is, and I have a great team. So we'll do wonderful things together. I've borrowed a phrase from Steve Jobs' book, which is, "Let's try to put a dent in the universe." And that's what I keep telling my team, and they keep pushing me to make that dent bigger and keep hitting harder.
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rehan.
Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure talking to you. Thank you. Okay.
Well done.
Yeah. Well done to you. I was just asking questions.
Thank you, Atyab, for spending the time.
My pleasure.
Nice conversation.
My pleasure. It's exactly what I was trying to
share
avoid.
with you and proceed further to Mazid.
Thank you for this.
Thank you very much.
Yes.